The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. Radio Days Europe is on in Lisbon, in Portugal. It's the largest radio conference in the world. Thomas Coppens from VRT shared podcast consumption data from the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium. Eric Nuzum and a colleague from Magnificent Noise did a masterclass about setting your podcast up for success. Research company Ipsos has released the third edition of their Italian study into digital audio. 31% of Italian adults listen to podcasts every month, says the data. YouTube Music is to make background listening available for free, starting with Canada. Chrome Unboxed suggests the app is to merge with Google Podcasts. The company is also rolling out live translations and a better subtitle editor. Clever calls itself the YouTube of podcasting. Oh, good. It claims to be creating the most interactive podcast experience on the market and say they solve the podcasting problem forever. It offers proprietary commenting features. Remote recording tool Zencastr now automatically generates transcriptions, and San Francisco's KQED has posted upcoming events for their PRX podcast garage. In the US, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. Podnews isn't based in the US, but will take this as an opportunity to acknowledge and respect the traditional custodians of the land where we live and work, the Turrbal and Jagera people in Brisbane, Australia. It's a Monday, so time for some impenetrable tech stuff, starting with the expiration of an old root certificate for Let's Encrypt. It's continuing to cause problems with some podcast platforms. NPR, Radio Public and TuneIn are no longer updating any RSS feeds from Anchor or FeedPress, and others secured with Let's Encrypt. It's up to them, NPR, Radio Public and TuneIn, to fix their servers to remove the old Let's Encrypt root cert from them. We linked to a fix which helped us last week when we had to do similar. The open list of podcast hosts containing details of patterns to look for in RSS feeds and audio URLs has been significantly updated by John Spurlock. To include many more hosts from the data, we link to a full list of podcast hosts in our show notes and our newsletter. There are now 2,209 podcasts that are value for value enabled, which is good. The Fountain app has been updated. It supports episode-level value splits, so you can share sats with your guests, and now supports serialized shows. It does value for value and RSS chapter points, among many other things. Libsyn Pro appears to have migrated many of its shows over to Libsyn RSS feeds, according to our podcast hosts tracker. We list those two as separate. Otherwise, our sample suggests Megaphone gained 27 shows overall last week, while Libsyn lost 25. Good Apple. Now that recent versions of Apple Podcasts use one central RSS scraper instead of every single phone calling on RSS feeds every single time, that's resulted in quite significant bandwidth savings for podcast hosts. Back in May, we saw 3,000 RSS hits from Apple Podcasts. Last Friday, we saw just 200. Bad Apple. The Apple Podcasts app now has 1,100 ratings on the Apple App Store and has a score of just 1.8. Ouch.
Boostergram corner.
Boostergrams this week from Gary Arndt, sending a Independence Boost 1776 sats through Fountain and saying, "This show is my primary way of keeping abreast with what's happening in the podcast industry." Thank you, Gary. Sir Pete, using Fountain, sends 5,000 sats and says, "More drinks, cheers." And someone anonymous sends 2,112 sats from Breeze, pointing out that Aussie Media is a very strange company. You're right. We made 22,815 sats last week, about $12.50, much from streaming. If you're not seeing a boost button in your podcast app, find a better one at newpodcastapps.com. And in podcast news, Sharoz Chowdhury has admitted in court that his stories, which made up a large part of the New York Times' podcast Caliphate, were entirely made up. He's never even been to Syria. He's been fined $8,000 and sentenced to a year of living with his parents in Ontario in Canada. It's harsh. In Podcasting 2.0, Adam Curry and Dave Jones chat with Brian of London, talking about Hive and its National Coming Out Day in Australia. The ABC has launched Innies and Outies with fascinating stories from diverse Australians about coming out or staying in. And that's the latest from our newsletter. For all the links, we're at podnews.net.